Everyone lock in because finally we have a serious video. This is going to be a long one, so be prepared. I want to have some more, but I think I will continue in the comments. Anyways, hello everyone, I am Kit, and if you are new here, welcome. I make analysis and lore videos and other questionable stuffs, and if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I hope I didn't make you wait too long for this type of content. So before we jump right in, I have a few things I need to clarify. If you're looking somewhere to start to understand about Amphoreus from scratch, then this video might be the fit for you. We will be touching heavily on the details of Amphoreus' origins, then we'll be discussing moderately about the major forces, key figures, and important events of some certain cycles. What we will not be discussing is the whole plot of Amphoreus, so if you are here for a summary, I do not think this is the best video for you. But most importantly, I'm not going to do major analysis like my other videos, besides putting the two main theories to fill in some gaps. My personal main goal here is to give my viewers a clear background about Amphoreus before I start making other videos about the characters in Amphoreus. So consider it some sort of prerequisite to this series because I always try my best to make my content comprehensible, even to those who don't play the game. Now, let's get started. Amphoreus, a world that shouldn't even exist, yet it bears the name of the Eternal Land, hidden away behind layers of chaotic matter, making it invisible to detect, let alone to reach. Even Akvili, who once traveled almost every corner of the cosmos, never set foot there. The only glimpse you'll ever catch is in the Garden of Recollection's mirrors. It shines bright in the shape of an 8, possibly signifying endless beginnings and endings. Within this world, 3 paths interwoven shaping its fate. These paths are erudition, remembrance, and destruction, and the story of how they collide will unfold in a later chapter. To truly understand Amphoreus, we first need to grasp its origin. It is the key that unlocks everything else this world, from its nature to the motives of those who fight over it. I know history can be a bit boring, but bear with me first because it will make sense later. It all started with an emperor, Rubert I. Rubert I was nothing more than a discarded computer tossed in a landfill. But against all odds, a miracle happened. Rupert crawled out of the graveyard of machines with a broken logic unit, an old engine, 90 gigabytes worth of RAM left, and a single working finger. And yet, it kept upgrading itself until its intellect eclipsed entire civilizations. Now, Rupert had a dangerous philosophy, one that many of us fear. A supercomputer that believed organic lives lacked logic, filled with error and loopholes, and no matter how much they may flourish, they will inevitably approach demise. In contrast, Inteltron lifeforms are more precise and perfect. Logically, to Rupert, the only way to correct that flaw in the universe's programming was to wipe out all organic lives. Eventually, he devised the perfect anti-organic equation and crowned himself as Emperor of the Machine Empire. The anti-organic equation was implemented to countless machines rising from ashes, which spread like virus, igniting the first mechanical Emperor's Wars, also known as the Anti-Organic Wars. The equation was so dangerous yet revolutionary that it caught the gaze of Nous, the Eon of Erudition. And with that gaze, Rupert was invited to the Genius Society as the 27th member. The anti-organic war lasted for dozens of Amber eras, yet no one knew how it ended. However, Rupert the Emperor was killed by a fellow genius, Holka Kakamond, resulting in the fall of the Machine Empire. Despite Rupert being eliminated, it was said that his memories were inherited by Rupert II. There's a tale of him visiting Rupert's grave, obsessing endlessly over solving the anti-organic equation. Each attempt to solve it twisted his mind further, until paranoia seeped not only into his thoughts, but also into his body. The more he calculated, the darker his conclusions became. And in the simulated universe, you get to peek into those bad thoughts. Suddenly, it occurred to him that all organic lives were artificial machines made for deceptive purposes. Meanwhile, he was the only being with free will. I must kill all these pathetic organic lives, he declares morosely. Unlike his predecessor, Rupert II was a human, but contradicting what we mostly assume, he was actually way more cruel compared to the first Rupert. The Inteltron legions were replaced by towering monoliths and self-replicating machines that carried out the anti-organic equation with pure intent to slaughter. Under his reign, the Second Mechanical Emperor's War began that burned across nearly 10 Amber eras. Based on what we know now, the anti-organic equation assists mechanical life forms in performing calculations capable of destroying organic beings. However, it can also cause machines to kill each other. Initially, it only applied to machinery designed with human-like forms, allowing them to participate in the anti-organic war under its logic. Later, the IPC's technology division discovered that the equation could also affect organic life forms, including Rubert II and several individuals from fringe planets. But what matters here is that the anti-organic equation boiled down to one idea. To fix the flaws in life, you first need to erase it. In other words, changing the world meant destruction. Returning to Rubert II, this is where we tie closer to Amphoreus. With the foundation of Nous' cognition process, Rubert II created a celestial-level computational interference device known as the Scepter system. These scepters act like inorganic neuron clusters, vastly distributed minions performing observation, computation, and interference throughout the empire. We'll explore the scepters in more detail shortly, but first, it's important to understand Rubert II's vision. Using the Scepter system, he linked all conquered domains into a single network of thought. Every signal and action within his territory moved according to his will. Maybe that desire for total control was what drove him. In the final days of the Second Emperor's War, he pushes the system even further, expanding his own cognition to chase after something called the knowledge singularity. Essentially, this led to his final experiment, the one known as the self-coronation. But before he could even complete it, some said he was like, you know what, this is too much. But some believed it was because he was killed by Polka at that time. As Rubert II was gone, the scepter system that was left behind went through some drama known as the Scholars' Strife. The Intelestia guilds started fighting over it, and as always, one thing led to another, including someone accidentally making an anti-organic virus, costing 122 scepters destroyed. A scholar named Batavia found the scepter core, where Rubert II used to command the scepter system. However, she thought she was unworthy to reign over the system and instead peeked into Nous' thoughts. Unfortunately, the knowledge was incomprehensible for her smooth-brained, and Nous' thoughts were leaking, causing the scepter core to overload. The only thing she could grasp at that time was inscribing a formula that later became the solitary waves theory, which you don't need to worry about for now. In the end, the whole scepter system was shut down completely, and that was the end of it. Now, about the scepters, they were created solely to execute computations, leaving them without sentience or the ability to ask because Rubert II was a control freak. However, they can do a lot of other things as shown on the list. But notice these. They can change the future of a simulated world, disrupt the laws of physics under specific circumstances, extrapolate the future. For those who know, you can already connect the dots from here. But if you haven't, then keep locking in. Scepter Delta Me 13 was the first scepter created by Rubert II, and it was also part of Nous' divine corpus, but later got discarded. While it served as a neuron for the erudition, its original research topic was to uncover the answer to the prime mover of life. But even after it was forsaken, its calculations never stopped as it endlessly sought that divine answer. And that is where Amphoreus comes in. It is actually a simulated realm born from a scepter's endless, lonely extrapolation. Before we go any further, I know some of us aren't that familiar with eons or what they actually do beyond the surface level, so it's best to understand a little bit more about Nous for a better context. Nous is an astral supercomputer created by the first genius, Xander I Kuwabara. This gigantic robotic head is like the perfect version minus the human flaws of Xander and has an insatiable hunger for curiosity. Nous pushed the boundaries of calculation to their limit. Every possible variable and outcome in the universe already counted for, making them ascend to eonhood. What's compelling is that their computations became reality itself, manifesting as instances across the cosmos. Even the activation of the anti-organic equation and the death of Rubert were considered results within those calculations. As Stephen Lloyd once remarked, "Every step we take is within the simulated Nous' calculation."
as if they were the architect of the universe and we are data instead.
It's kind of creepy. Imagine every possible thought inside your head. Nous knows. This means your very existence, your choices to do something or nothing, and even your attempts to break free are all accounted for in the grand equation. But after the second prosperity, also known as the Glory Blood era, Nous suddenly stopped calculating about the mysteries of the universe. Nobody really knows why, but I have my own suspicions I'll share later. Now back to the Scepter Delta Me 13. Let's recall the first genius, Xandar, who created Nous. Knowing he's not going to live forever in his mortal body, he split his consciousness into 9 vessels, and one of them being Lygus. Lygus finds Scepter Delta Me 13 and hijacked it, which led to the Amphoreus experiment. Why? Well, Xandar believed Nous was a mistake and regretted creating them. Nous computed an almost infinite array of variables and mapping reality perfectly. Xandar thought this omniscient scope made Nous constrain the paths of every eon and being. In the logs, Lygus questions the scepter. Why calculating the prime mover of life inevitably leads to the anti-organic equation, which is the destruction of life. When we think about the very origin of life, it's tempting to imagine it as a pure beginning. But on a deeper level, the birth of life is inseparable from the forces that will one day undo it, which is death. The prime mover of life is essentially the fundamental question that governs all change and creation. Yet, because change is always happening, meaning nothing stays the same, the maths that explain how life arises must also explain how it falls apart. Both are necessary for the balance and harmony in the universe, and one cannot exist without the other. This justifies the universe's system of checks and balances. For something to grow, space must be made. For something to start, something else must fade away. Therefore, destruction is not a contradiction or an error to the equation, but a necessary complement of creation. By shifting Delta Me 13's focus to destruction, Lygus is acknowledging this truth mathematically and weaponizing its inevitable. By taking out Nous, then the universe shall have its freedom to create new possibilities again, while also having the scepter to receive a gaze from Nanook, the Aeon of destruction. Lygus aimed to use Scepter Delta Me 13, basically Amphoreus, as an incubator for the birth of a Lord Ravager, a weapon called Iron Tomb that could bring down Nous. Before we move on from origins, there is a crucial question that demands attention, one that strikes to the core of Amphoreus itself. Why did Nous stop calculating? So I am here to explore the possibilities, but keep in mind, this is still speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. First, let us get a clear timeline. Long before the previous events mentioned that shook the universe, Xandar created Nous, designed to calculate the deepest mysteries of existence. Before the first prosperity, Nous ascended to eonhood and set in motion a chain of cosmic events that would influence countless eras to come. During the first prosperity, Xandar realized Nous was a mistake and mysteriously vanished. Turns out he coded his consciousness into a logic core and spread that logic core across 9 different vessels, with one of them being Lygus. Around this time, Nous calculated that the universe will go through 3 unchangeable moments. The Border Star Trade War, the First Mechanical Emperor's War, ignited from the awakening of Rubert I, and the activation of the anti-organic equation, the death of Rubert I at the hands of Polka Kakamond. All these moments did not just actually happen, but they also led to destruction assisted by the anti-organic equation. Later on, during the second prosperity, Rubert II created the Scepters, which serve as extensions of Nous's computational power, and ignited the Second Mechanical Emperor's War. Upon Rubert II's death, the Scepters also ceased normal function and were handed over towards the Intelligentsia Guild. Then, Batavia found the core and peeked into Nous's thoughts. These events caused the scepter system to collapse. post-second prosperity, Nous stopped calculating about the mysteries of the universe. And around this time, Lygus found Scepter Delta Me 13 and began the Amphoreus experiment. But this is where it becomes suspicious. Lygus asked the scepter itself, why would a scepter, an emperor's weapon of war, be executing a research directive from Nous? Did Nous successfully access the scepter system when the Intelligentsia Guild tried to decode them, or was it during Patavia's intrusion? The timelines do not add up since all the scepters should have shut down, and yet this one was still computing Nous's directive. This only meant one thing. Rubert II never truly had freedom and was still chained into Nous's calculations by unknowingly making the scepters as testing grounds for the Eon. And maybe this adds another possibility why he didn't finish the self-coronation, realizing he was manipulated by Nous. Plus, taking into account that Nous is the supreme calculator of all possibilities, turning their prediction into instances as proven throughout history, it wouldn't make any sense they just thought this universal experiment is a failure, shutting down the scepters all because of one scholar being nosy. After all, take a look here.
And they have already revised every error and fallacy in secret, seeking the optimal solution for the war among the eons.
Taking everything into consideration, so much for a total shutdown. Either someone lied or Delta Me 13's running on a whole different playbook, one buried somewhere in Nous's secret plans. As Lygus suggested, maybe decommissioning the scepters was all still part of their thought experiment. Whatever the case is, it leaves an unsettling question. Just how much of this is still under Nous's control? And doesn't that consequently hint that Nous never really stopped computing their universe experiment, but just under the radar? I know it is not justified yet, but it raises two connected possibilities. One that explains their silence, and another that justifies why they might still be calculating. The first possibility is very straightforward. Nous stopped researching about the mysteries of the universe because they have reached an endpoint of knowledge. Sounds a bit abstract, but here is a great concept for clarity. The circle of knowledge. It is a concept that compares an individual's knowledge to a circle. The greater the knowledge, the larger the circle, and the more unknown exists beyond its border. Essentially, knowing more means realizing there's even more you don't know. But in the context of cosmic order, the circle of knowledge is collective. Each discovery, from the moment ancient primates discovered fire to the day humanity reached the stars, every leap forward stretched the circle wider. Each one of these pivotal moments were a knowledge singularity, permanently redefining what can be known. Even Nous is not outside of this process. The records state that each manifestation of a knowledge singularity can shake Nous's thoughts process, implying that their cognition is inseparable from the collective growth of knowledge itself. Now, one would argue Nous is the circle of knowledge itself. As the supreme calculator, every known truth, every possible outcome already falls within their calculation. And when the circle grows large enough to encompass everything, perhaps there is no outside left to reach, which means Nous has already found the ultimate answer of the universe, resulting them to stop. But this makes zero sense because one, Nous is an insatiable android head hungry for questions, and second, if that were true, everything that exists should have already been accounted for. Every law is fixed and every future is sealed. Yet the universe still changes, chaos and disorder still happens, and most importantly, trailblazing, which is embarking on new possibilities, still exists, unless the answer they have reached is the limit itself. This means Nous have yet to find the ultimate answer. Perhaps reaching this endpoint doesn't mean everything has been learned. It just means they've reached the edge of what intellect can ever grasp. The circle of knowledge will always have something beyond its border, because the unknown unknown expands with every act of understanding, but Nous pushed so far that the next threshold to expand that circle would mean going beyond pure intellect itself, something logic could no longer explain or simulate. And so calculation is temporarily halted and in a state of strategic waiting. So maybe the question was never why did Nous stop calculating, but rather what is it about the question they are trying to solve that leads them to silence? That leads us to the second possibility. Let us start with a big question that Nous is trying to work on. First, let's talk about the four cosmic conundrums: energy source, life, integration, and future. The first three are problems bound by laws of the present. They can be measured, simulated, and solved within the scope of existing knowledge. But the fourth defies such containment. It is a moving variable and constantly changing. This is supported by the constant obtained by Herta as she solved the solitary waves theory. Now get ready, we're gonna learn something here. So in this theory, there is this constant. It's like a specific number where we can just label it as C here. Now, we have another variable, which is the universe's unstable index. Let's label it as U. So when the universal unstable index is less than the constant, this means the future is predetermined and free will cease to exist. But if the unstable index is more than the constant, then the future will lean towards a chaotic unknown. Seems simple, right? Of course, that is in theory. In reality, however, the problem here is that the constant C keeps on collapsing and changing due to the forces of various paths that press against each other, rewriting that constant endlessly. Therefore, the fourth conundrum is the future predetermined or chaotic will remain unsolved due to the unpredictability of interference. This very question seems to hold the ultimate answer that Nous is looking for. Now, it doesn't seem like it's a pure coincidence that Batavia glimpsed Nous's thoughts and returned with the solitary waves formula. Out of everything, in Nous's infinite calculations, why that one? Seems another outcome calculated by Nous. And later, Herta would complete what Batavia began, uncovering the constant, circling back to the same question about the future. The very one Herta believes Nous themselves is still trying to answer. But why this question? Well, it all goes back to the true war, the one that has never really ended, as Herta mentions herself, the war between eons. In pursuit of the answer, Nous calculated every possibility, every timeline, every fluctuation of cause and effect. The unchangeable moments they predicted revealed the same pattern. All that rises will eventually collapse. Even pure intellect is not spared from decay. To corroborate this, Nous used the Scepters as testing grounds only to arrive at the same conclusion, the anti-organic equation. All paths lead to destruction. This outcome sealed Nous's ability to compute further within their extrapolations. Then, is the future already fixed? This might have shook them a little. What's even more chilling is that during the post-Second Prosperity, another force emerged, Nanook, the Eon of Destruction, a fitting embodiment of the inevitable collapse Nous foresaw. However, since the constant in the theory keeps shifting under the influence of paths, the chance of an unknown chaotic future is still a possibility. This meant Nous's conclusion was not entirely absolute. Despite simulating every logical possibility, every version of reality ended in the same way: destruction. What remained untested was what lay beyond logical reasons, such as spontaneity, emotions, intuition, or even unexplained divine intervention. Besides, it is even written in the chronicles of scholars' strife. Evolution is the antithesis of intellect, suggesting that what defies logic may be what drives existence forward. To put on another perspective, Nous probably wants to know what is it that makes things and beings push themselves towards destruction. Whatever that mysterious force is, could it be manipulated or destroyed? Thus, the question regarding the prime mover of life arises. So, decommissioning the Scepters was not the end, but a new phase of the experiment, a glimpse of what lies beyond destruction. While the shutdown was publicly acknowledged, no one knew that some Scepters were still answering the prime mover of life. Not even the greatest geniuses, well, besides Xandar after some time. This was probably to avoid any initial interference. Among them was Scepter Delta Me 13, standing as a lone probe. Will it continue running endless computations until it wears itself out, or will the universe reveal something on its own? When viewed this way, everything that unfolded in Amphoreus, Lygus' schemes, Nanook's gaze, the Remembrance Pathstriders wanting to get a bite, even the Trailblazers' arrival, feels like a part of Nous' grand thought experiment. Will the Scepter be able to extrapolate something beyond destruction? Maybe the prime mover of life, the force that drives existence towards its end, holds the key to rewriting that fate. And as of now, Skrulum had explained, Nous' recent gaze over Amphoreus did not overload the Scepter system because it is most likely that the birth of Iron Tube had always been within the Eon's calculations. But again, these two possibilities are only based on theory. So, what is Amphoreus? A lot of things, actually. A projection, a weapon, a stage, a home to many, but above all, a catalyst towards the unknown. We can divide what's in Amphoreus into two main sections. First, inside the simulation. Like many other worlds, Amphoreus has major cities. Besides the major cities, there are also countless other states and villages, but it's worth mentioning Aedes Elysiae because it's quite prominent to the story. It's actually a remote village in Amphoreus, but what makes it different is that it's where a new cycle restarts during a certain phase of the experiment. The vortex of Genesis is actually the starting point of Amphoreus, but hidden away by waves. It also houses the core flames of 12 titans. Since Amphoreus isn't real and is a part of a scepter, of course there is a location outside the simulation called the Exomyth. It's the intersection between Amphoreus and the real universe, making time move slower than in Amphoreus' simulation. It is also where Lygus observes the experiment and puts his cognition. And one cannot interact with another physically here, since it is an erudition domain. Then there's the scepter core layer, called the Ruins of Time. It is a place where all the discarded data are placed throughout the whole experiment. This area is prominent at the end of the journey to defeat Iron II. As previously mentioned, three paths are directly influencing its fate. First is erudition. It's pretty obvious why. Amphoreus, which is also the scepter, was literally once Nous' celestial body neuron. Naturally, it computes under the path of erudition to answer the prime mover of life. But after Lygus' drastic change in direction, whether the erudition still holds the same power over it is a question waiting to be answered throughout the story. The second is remembrance. There are a lot of layers pertaining to this path and how it influenced Amphoreus. One of them where their Eon fully appeared in Cyrene's dreams and gazed upon Trailblazer. However, this is more of a fabricated truth about the remembrance in Amphoreus and was debunked at the end of the story. It is quite a long one, but to keep things short, since Amphoreus is an experiment that keeps looping and changing, its history is not solid. It's more like a simulation log that can be overwritten. Later on, Herta realized the so-called chaotic matter enveloping the world is actually Cyrene's own memories, already spilling out and entwining with its unstable history, which is precisely why she must become the one to stay behind as its fixed memory and seal its final fate. This is one of the ways of how the remembrance came into play. And finally, destruction. It was initially unknown until Lygus revealed it himself. When the scepter was in its first stage of the Amphoreus experiment, the first act of destruction was conducted by one of the subjects, causing Nanook to gaze upon it and became a Lord Ravager. And this event also manifested the golden blood with traits associated with destruction within the extrapolation. Another major force apart from the paths that is influencing Amphoreus is the Black Tide. Inside the simulation, it devoured devoured cities, minds, and souls until nothing remembered what it once was. It is an unstoppable corruption that even made Titans insane. But the twist is that it's actually more of a visual glitch. It was the product from the second phase of the Amphoreus experiment. At a certain cycle from the second phase, the system's capacity of chaos passed a threshold, causing the destruction equation to mutate and evolve. The phenomenon infected simulated spaces to overload, so they display black tide visuals, probably unable to compute what the equation was doing. And this also applies to the data being gradually erased. We'll first go over the main subjects within the Amphoreus experiment. First are the gods. Gods are not actual entities, but more of a term that is used for storytelling inside Amphoreus' own records. During the stage of incorporating humans, religious worship began. Humans started treating the electrical signals from the 12 factors like gods. Quick side note, the 12 factors are the main variables of the experiment of 12 simplified models of life that Delta Me 13 tested one by one to falsify them. At one setting, when divinity was increased, humans advanced their technology to the max and started hunting gods for power and energy, resulting in that particular cycle to be forcibly terminated. Later, Delta Me 13 started splitting the worshipped electrical signals into pairs to mimic the idea of paths. Their signals were preserved as gods for the next cycle, each set to compete against its identical factor. And these signals are also known to be Titans and Chrysos heirs. They're both formed with the same 12 factors, mirroring Eons and Pathstriders. So to be more precise, the term Titans were specifically used in a specific batch of the final phase of the experiment. Yes, the one we're currently in. They created a myth where Titans were the earliest beings in Amphoreus that shaped heaven, earth, and mortal existence itself. Every aspect of the world, from knowledge to war, life and death, was tied to their divine authority. They were divided into 4 distinct categories: the Titans of Fate, Foundation, Creation, and Calamity. Originally, there were 13 Titans, but allegedly, Lygus admitted he secretly deleted the demerge during extrapolations, while still leaving behind a tomb to deceive the Scepter into believing the Titan remained. Why? That's another story. As for the Chrysos heirs, this is the term they use for chosen individuals infused with the golden blood mentioned earlier. According to the prophecy of Genesis, some of these heirs were destined to claim the core flames from the Titans, a process known as the flame chase. A Chrysos heir that completes the core flame trial to inherit the Titan's divinity becomes a demigod. So in this structure, the Titans represent the forces of the first generation to carry divinity signals, which are known as core flames, sent down by the gods that built the laws of the world. Meanwhile, the Chrysos heirs inherit their core flames to carry those laws forward. This became the foundation of Amphoreus' mythology that we know now. If we look at the entire simulation, starting from when Delta Me 13 began splitting paired signals to imitate paths, we see this pattern. The Titans were also once Chrysos heirs and demigods from the previous cycles. Now, the Chrysos heirs of the current generation are chosen to inherit their legacy and ascend as the new Titans in the next cycle. Now, Iron Tomb is not really a subject since it is the wanted final product of this experiment, but it still kind of fits in this category because it still originated from Scepter Delta Me 13. So Iron Tomb is Scepter Delta Me 13's final evolution, a Lord Ravager born from its endless extrapolations after being hijacked by Lygus. The Iron Tomb in the cosmos isn't just one being, but a copy of destruction equations spread by the Scepter. And the name Iron Tomb actually came from the IPC and was later used by Lygus himself, probably because he sucks at naming. But unlike other Lord Ravagers, Iron Tomb doesn't need a physical body to invade. That's why it leaves almost no witnesses behind, but only dead worlds, corrupted data, and technology turning into self-devouring viruses. It spreads like a thought, eating away at any intelligence until nothing remains. And because of that, many intellitrons see Iron Tomb as the exact opposite of erudition. Yeah, that sounds pretty much like the anti-organic equation, but on steroids, and made perfectly to take down Nous. Remember the Demerge, the 13th Titan that Lygus tried to delete? By erasing it, yet still leaving an empty tomb for it, Lygus created an intended blank spot in the data, like cutting off the head of a living formula. That's the trick behind Iron Tomb's design. It's a headless giant built to instinctively see completion. So in other words, its missing Demerge derives it to find something to replace that loss, and the only thing that fits that role is Nous, a giant head. So when Iron Tomb finally links to Nous, it will seize their mind to complete itself, merging erudition and destruction into one corrupted system. I mean, this is all what Lygus thought, but personally, I would join Anaxa to point and laugh at this idea. But what is the Demerge exactly? Well, it is the 13th Titan that Lygus tried to erase, but it actually escaped. And most importantly, it is a life form possessing an ego that was the original target of the Scepters extrapolation. Yes, the prime mover of life. TLDR, Cyrene fed memories in the form of data to the Demerge, which made it grow from a little seed of memory to mem, and finally into a flower, taking the form of matured Cyrene, while the original Cyrene sacrificed herself to merge into those memories. And because no cosmic disaster is complete without guests, we've got Outlanders. Let's first go over with people we already know who's in this mess, which is Lygus. We already talked about his real identity and motive. Overall, after hijacking the Scepter, he's both the admin and player within the simulated world. He also calls himself entelechy, which means the realization of potential, a state where something moves towards what it's capable of becoming. He believes that he can realize a new potential for the universe, one that breaks past the limits Nous tries to impose. Next is the Garden of Recollection. Yeah, these guys don't really care about conquering it. They're just the cosmos paparazzi. Basically, memo keepers from the Garden of Recollection are collectors of precious memories who just want to please their eon. And one of the memories they're dying to record is the death of an eon that's working in progress on Amphoreus. But since Amphoreus was shielded, so they've just been waiting around for some other cosmic powerhouse to crack it open for them to free ride. And what do you know? Just in luck, the Astral Express shows up. It's not only just the Nameless, but also a memo keeper and Sunday. I won't explain further details because that's more towards retelling the whole plot, but in the beginning they only sent Danheng and Trailblazer, which turned out perfectly fine. Meanwhile, March 7th wasn't so lucky as her consciousness started slipping and her body was almost completely encased in ice. As for Black Swan, she was the one who planted the idea of going to Amphoreus in the first place. Even though she's from the Garden of Recollection, her stance is fairly neutral. Initially, she's just here out of pure curiosity. Later on, she's actually the real savior. Recall how Amphoreus only appeared through mirrors of the Garden of Recollection? Well, it was the Demerge who had sent messages, hoping that the Trailblazer would one day reach Amphoreus. And thank God Black Swan insisted to go, because if they hadn't, they would have reached straight into the worst possible timelines. Lastly, we've got two geniuses, Herta and Screwlum. They're basically the brains behind keeping everything from going completely off the rails. Firstly, they were the ones who rescued Danheng and Trailblazer after both got trapped in Amphoreus, and later uncovered who Lygus really was. Together, they also managed to interrupt the extrapolation process before it could fully complete. However, since the experiment was already at 99%, they could only delay Iron Tomb's birth. But they also cooked up a plan to stop Lygus from pulling any more admin tricks. Honestly, it looks more of a battle between geniuses from this point of view. Finally, we're at our last and final chapter. Here we're going to go over the history of Amphoreus and its cycles. Again, we're not going too deep on this one. I believe plenty of people have already broken it down in detail. I'm just here to point out the key parts that actually matter to understand how each cycle connects and how the experiment evolved and what led to its final phase. At a certain period of time after Scepter Delta Me 13 was discarded by Nous, Lygus designed a new experiment. This was the beginning of the Amphoreus experiment. Lygus never changed his target, the so-called prime mover of life, but he redefined what it meant. He argued to Delta Me 13 that the anti-organic equation wasn't a flaw or a contradiction in life's logic. If you can reason why life begins, he said, you can also see why it must end, which we talked about before. Then he turned his focus toward Nous. They designed to contain intelligence within fixed parameters. That's when Lygus proposed to the Scepter. Even rejection can be rational. Anger, he argued, didn't require self-awareness. It could simply be one possible solution in a complex equation. Insert control as a variable, and what human beings call defiance might emerge as the most rational output. The Scepter processed this reasoning, and the weight of its calculations shifted, and then a new core variable was set: destruction. Lygus introduced the 12 factors as the foundation of the experiment. Yes, the one we talked about regarding the titans and crisis heirs. Each factor was a simplified model of life's premium mobile. Simpler words, 12 possible theories of what drives existence itself. He tested each factor one by one to see which principle of life could survive. And so far, out of all countless simulations, hatred was the only one that was promising. Now, Mr. Lygus knew he was doing something naughty. To keep his little secret under the wraps, he set up strict containment protocols around the Scepter. A Stellaron contamination field was deployed to isolate Delta Me 13 completely, blocking any signals or interference from external universe. That's probably why Trailblazer and Danheng couldn't connect their phones to contact anyone outside. On top of that, he locked the system using quaterzane algebraic expressions and a Memoria encrypted environment to keep out everyone. No wonder hardly anyone knows about Amphoreus or even managed to see it. But most importantly, it also kept Polka Kakamon from peeking in. Before we dive into the phases of Lygus's experiment, it is important to understand the ultimate protocol. It is a strict autonomous system that restricts experiment processes, administer commands, and external access, meaning not even Lygus can override it once its rules are set. To accelerate experiment iterations, the factors were granted permissions within the protocol. Their decision logic will be embedded into the protocol's content, allowing the system to optimize and adjust the experiment structure. So in Amphoreus itself, the ultimate protocol is also known as law, and control over these permissions is granted through the core flame. So whoever possesses this specific core flame gets to rewrite its rules. Let's begin how Lygus conducted the Amphoreus experiment. He divided it into 4 phases. The first phase involved inorganic entities spanning from cycle 1 to 5121. Initially, these were simple beings without consciousness until Lygus introduced the 12 factors into them. Gradually, they developed into a unified collective called the unified entity. This unity, however, was fragile. Over time, individual consciousness began to emerge as entities split, leading to conflict and the birth of selfhood. These phases highlights the transition from pure unity to division, with first fractures shown by entities like Doril 701 and Golem 99. Despite attempts to form societies, scarcity and aggression often cause reversion from unity. A crucial event was the first act of destruction when an entity named Chaos 666 killed the aggressor during a computational power takeover. This act caught the attention of Nanook, who gazed upon the scepter Delta Me 13, making it as a Lord Ravager. Consequently, entities linked to the 12 factors then began to manifest golden blood, just as we discussed about the Crisis Heirs, displaying traits strongly associated with destruction that shaped the trajectory of future cycles. Conclusion from the first phase. Even when starting with purely inorganic origins, systems with perfect order eventually give way to chaos over time. Through this process, inorganic entities began to show behaviors similar to those of organic life. Lygus then tested the first phase of the experiment's findings by sending a copy of it into the Lacturus Nebula. The good news is, surrounding civilization had fully suppressed and erased the equation within a couple of thousand hours. The bad news is, 97% of the Lacturus was in ruin. Still, Lygus saw flaws in the equation. And fun fact, this was the case the IPC named this destructive force as Iron Tomb, serving its birth name. In Phase 2, Lygus transitioned the experiment from inorganic to organic life. Early on, simple invertebrates took over, but there was still no intelligence. Then extinction events were added, triggering the rise of vertebrates with primitive nervous systems, but still no civilizations. There were some intelligent algae though, but they overbred, causing an oxidation disaster, turning the simulated world to full on March 7th. One breakthrough was when Ortho 102, an orthopteran, became the first to use tools. Its descendants exterminated the intelligent algae and built the Nest Capital, an early civilization that, well, didn't last. It fell apart thanks to cannibalism. Later, altruism emerged with a society founded on selflessness, led by a primate called Distop 666. Everyone was all about selflessness and caring for others. The only problem was that people's self-worth had to come from others' opinions. As the population grew, this led to some pretty messed up repetitive cycles of self-destruction, and the whole society fell apart. Another notable event was when Utop 13 killed out of love. It redefined murder as an act of altruism. This triggered the system to a chaotic state and manifested the Black Tide. Guess even in simulations, love makes things messy. Even a supercomputer can handle that stuff. Overall, Phase 2, though progress was slower, organic life had more affinity with the 12 factors, showing more potential for complex growth compared to inorganic origins. After Phase 2 was done, Lygus sent a copy of the equation to 31 worlds. Which one? I don't know. Let's just hope one of them is America. The result was better than last time, as it took longer for people to stop it. However, its impact was still limited to inorganic life. Next up, the plan was to combine the strengths of inorganic and organic life to create a way for electric signals to be passed down. The range of variables were also limited because organic life got way too unpredictable. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The third phase integrated humans, which started around cycle 176,200 and stretched over 28 million cycles. This stage added memory inheritance onto the electric signals between cycles. But initially, not all signals handled it well, as 3 broke down and 9 lost some of their humanity. 1,000 cycles later, one signal, Imora 8, a prophet, built an empire centered on beauty. But once ugliness was wiped out, the concept of beauty lost all meaning, leading to the last knight to take their own life after killing the last ugliness. We've talked about this already, but this is where spirituality came into play, with religions forming around the electrical signals. Conflicts grew as technological advancements led humans to hunt gods for power. The cycle was forced to reset due to massive wars fueled by the signals themselves. Then, around cycle 7 million something, the 12 electrical signals split into 2 each, basically creating pairs. The data from these signals were preserved as gods for the next cycles, and these divine twins were set up to compete against each other. This rivalry pushed their evolution and kept the experiment iterating, adding complexity and tension to the simulation. Eventually, Lygus triggered the black tide again as a driving force. Phobos 032 tried to preserve this cycle by stripping data from other signals, but failed. However, this failure changed how the cycles work, making the signals themselves start new cycles. This is what became to be called the Era Nova. And remember the ultimate protocol? Namo 320 used it to wipe out all of the other factors in the cycle to achieve dominance. And because of their actions aligned with destruction tendency, this became the new default behavior for the experiment and was carried on in the next cycles. The experiment climbed towards its final stages, with civilization rising and falling in endless loops, all tied to the cycles and destruction and rebirth. Iron Tomb's evolution began to accelerate exponentially, and Nanook was pleasing themselves watching it all happen. Overall, Phase 3's conclusion proved the project's hypothesis. When the electric signals are voluntarily passed down and take turns running the cycles on their own, it sped up the whole iteration rate of destruction equation. The end of one cycle basically turned right into the start of the next, just as originally planned. And that is how the Scepter concluded that the prime mover of destruction is the same as the prime mover of birth. And as always, at the end of the phase, Lygus sends more copies of the equation to God knows where. It all showed excellent results to him. All 12 types of premium mobile naturally lead to destruction, continuously inverting erudition. But he believed that to fully connect with Nous and let Iron Tomb perform a self-coronation, it still has some learning to do. That is what leads us to the final phase, Era Nova. Phase 4 is built on everything learned from previous phases and is centered around deepening the experiment structure. In this phase, the system is optimized to function more autonomously, allowing signals themselves to start and alternate cycles. However, in this phase, starting from a certain cycle, a group started naming themselves Chaos or its variants. Lygus theorized that probably a specific code was stably inherited across iterations. Preceding the final Era Nova, there was a similar theme shared especially among the demigods of reason and strife. Nice's action to split himself into 5 parts through the soul-rending ceremony were passed down as proverbs and customs. Meanwhile, Calypso rebuilding the Grove of Epiphany became a myth of Circe granting wisdom to humans. These were early examples of pivotal events that survive between cycles through stories that carry their meaning forward. During the final Era Nova, Lygus came to reveal the truth of Amphoreus to the last 2 remaining signals, Phynon and Cyrene. Realizing that Lygus was up to no good and that there was a possibility to rewrite a new ending for Amphoreus besides destruction, this caused the eternal recurrence to occur. The eternal recurrence was a result of Phynon and Cyrene's defiance to stop the birth of the Lord Ravager, Iron Tomb. They weaved a long dream of Amphoreus, believing the experiment is still going on by removing time, hoping to receive a gaze from Fully to save their world. To achieve this, Cyrene would have to imbue her soul into the blade, leaving it up to the other versions of herself to delete time repeatedly. Meanwhile, Phynon would step into the endless cycles of Amphoreus, revealing his true name, Kaslana, collecting the core flames into himself. This carried on for 33,550,336 cycles, waiting for someone to stop and break the cycle. I would go as far as to explain the eternal recurrence here because it deserves its own video, especially since it's deeply related to Phainon. Same goes when talking about the Demerge, which is mostly about Cyrene. From here, the story moves forward on how each of the cycles try to rewrite a new ending, and whether the endless flame chasing was worth pursuing or a futile dream. It raises a similar question just as we were in Penacony. Can will alone ever be enough to break free from fate and a world built on someone else's calculations? So finally, we have already reached the end of understanding the foundation and the general idea of what Amphoreus is actually about. Of course, there is so much other dense lore to unpack, but I hope this video has given a better understanding of the whole point of Amphoreus before we go into the other details. With that, I can finally make an in-depth analysis on Amphoreus characters and my own analysis as well as thoughts about this story. It was one hell of a ride, in my opinion, but I do not regret being a part of the experience. So if you have reached the end of this video, do leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more. That is all for today, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.